Deep in the infocrypts of Jovius, Curator Albus Tattersall oversees the maintenance and legibility of ancient scrolls and data slates alike. You stand before the aged adept and inquire about the forbidden lore that has been hidden away from the common man. These are the stories that Data Vault 13b houses. Behold Vulkan, Lord of Drakes, Hammer of Salvation, Primarch of the Salamanders. Behold as he leads the forces of the Imperium in a planetary assault on Ulanor against the forces of the Beast, an orc warboss the likes of which have not been seen since the Great Crusade. Wielding the hammer Doomtremor, he is resplendent in his baroque battleplate as he cleaves through hordes of greenskins. As the battle reaches its fever pitch, the Lord of Drakes charges at the Temple Gargant to face the beast alone. He is last seen falling towards the power generator after tackling the beast into it, as it explodes in a brilliant display of light. How did it come to this? Our story begins with grand upheaval. When the Emperor's gene lab was ravaged by warp energy, and his 20 suns scattered across the universe, Vulkan would land on the geologically unstable Nocturne. Nocturne is a binary planetary system, with its oversized moon Prometheus circling Nocturne erratically, causing massive tectonic stress called the Time of Trials. It was during this time that Vulkan's pod crash-landed and was found by a local blacksmither named Mbel. Mbel raised Vulkan as his own, but after a year it had become apparent that Vulkan was extraordinary, as he towered above his fellow Nocturnians and showed an aptitude for every task put before him, be they physical or mental. Aside from the Time of Trials, Nocturne also dealt with frequent Xenos raids by what the Nocturnians called Dusk Wraiths. These Xenos, that Imperial savants would later classify as a subspecies of the Eldari, kidnapped the Nocturnians with such regularity that everyone had their own personal shelter to wait out the raid. During Vulkan's 4th year on Nocturne, the Dusk Wraiths came again, but Vulkan refused to hide, standing instead at the center of town with 2 smithing hammers as weapons. So inspired were the people that they took up arms and stood with Vulkan to defend themselves. With the Primarch's aid, the Dusk Wraiths were decisively driven back, and soon every major leader on Nocturne had traveled to meet Vulkan and swore to never hide again. In celebration of this heroic victory, a great tournament was to be held, when a stranger arrived to take part. Pale of complexion and clad in outlandish clothing, he claimed he could best anyone taking part in this tournament. This drew considerable laughter from the townsfolk, when surely none could best Vulkan. Vulkan and the stranger made a bet that whoever lost to the other would forever serve the winner. After 8 days of competition, the 2 combatants were tied, and a final feat was set before them. Each would have 1 day to craft and hunt the biggest salamander they could find. Vulkan was quick to find and kill a large fire drake, only for a nearby volcano to erupt and throw him off a cliff. Vulkan managed to grab the ledge with one hand and the tail of the salamander with the other, but such was the size of the beast that he could not lift it and himself over the edge. After hanging there for some time, did the stranger arrive to bear witness to Vulkan's plight. The stranger carried his own drake with him, and Vulkan could easily see that it was much greater than the one he had hunted. The stranger, seeing Vulkan's distress, threw his own fire drake into a river of lava and ran to aid the hanging Primarch. Pulling Vulkan up from mortal danger, the 2 walked back to town, with Vulkan winning the challenge since the stranger had nothing to show for his hunt. Vulkan was declared the winner, but he knew that the stranger had won and knelt before this outlander that valued life over pride, stating that such a man was worthy of service. It was here that the stranger cast off his guise and revealed himself as the Emperor of mankind, and so was Vulkan reunited with his father. Like all of his siblings, Vulkan journeyed to Terra with the Emperor to learn of his dream for a united mankind and the conquest of reason over religion. Unlike most of the other Primarchs, however, Vulkan stayed for over a year on Terra, crafting many of his wondrous items and learning what he could of mankind's history. It was after this point that Vulkan took 3,000 Nocturnian recruits to relieve his beleaguered legion, known at this time as the Dragon Warriors, at the Taurus system, where a horde of greenskins was poised to overwhelm them. The Orks were caught between the anvil of the Dragon Warriors and the hammer of Vulkan's recruits, and were quickly destroyed as the Space Marines were galvanized by the sight of their Primarch. After saving his legion from certain death, Vulkan renamed them to the Salamanders, in honor of the great beast that had united him with the Emperor. During the Great Crusade, the Salamanders were often rumored to be the smallest legion, though this is highly doubtful given the situations facing the Emperor's children and the Thousand Sons at the same time. Vulkan himself earned a repute as the most humane of the Primarchs, never seeking undue harm when it came to the act of compliance and subjugation of human worlds. This trait brought him into confrontation with many of his brother Primarchs, most notably Conrad Curse, Mortarion, and Ferrus Manus. When Horus turned against the Emperor at Istvana III, Vulkan was among those Primarchs close enough to respond to the Emperor's decree that Horus be brought to justice. He, along with Ferrus Manus and Corvus Corax, would be the first wave to shatter the traitor's defenses at Istvan V. Vulkan took his salamanders up the right flank to cover Ferrus and his Iron Hands as they went up the center. This tactic seemed to work as the traitors were forced to fall back. Vulkan pleaded with Ferrus to fall back and let the second wave have some measure of glory and mop up the remaining traitors. Ferrus would have none of it and pushed on, with Vulkan and Chorus falling back. This would prove a disaster, as Horus had already turned the legions of the second wave to his banner and crushed the 3 loyalist legions. Vulkan survived this massacre only due to his innate ability as a perpetual, an ability of regeneration that offered effective immortality, but he was discovered by Conrad Curse and his Night Lords. Vulkan would suffer every single depravity that Conrad could imagine, slowly losing his sanity as Curse tried in vain to kill his enduring brother. This went on for months, until Vulkan managed to navigate a maze designed by Perturabo, and recover his personal Warhammer Dawnbringer and activate the built-in teleporter. This flung Vulkan to the upper atmosphere of Macragge, only to burn up during re-entry. The Ultramarines were at first unable to identify the burnt-up husk of the Primarch, only informing Roboute Guilliman of the fact later on when Vulkan slowly regenerated his form, much to the surprise of the Ultramarines' apothecaries. Unfortunately, the Primarch of the Salamanders was broken both mentally and physically, attacking anyone that came close. Vulkan broke out of the Apothecarian when he instinctively sensed Conrad in Macragge, seeking out the Night Hunter to wreak deluded vengeance on his traitorous brother. This duel culminated with the seeming true death of Vulkan, when John Grammaticus stabbed Vulkan with a Fulgurite spear, a petrified bolt of the Emperor's own psychic abilities. The triumvirate of Imperium Secundus, Roboute Guilliman, Lionel Johnson, and Sanguinius, recovered Vulkan's body and placed him in a stasis capsule and given over to the salamanders that had made it from Istvan to Macragge, until such a time that Vulkan's body could be returned to Nocturne. This expedition through the Ruin Storm was led by Artelis Numion, captain of Vulkan's Pyre Guard, who braved many dangers to bring his lord back to Mount Deathfire, and gave his own life to resurrect him. When Vulkan awoke in the heart of Deathfire, he found himself in a confused state. Unable to remember anything since Conrad's tortures, he conversed with a figure that claimed to be Deathfire personified, who urged Vulkan to return to Terra. The figure showed Vulkan 2 items that the Primarch had no recollection of forging: the Thunderhammer Udracul and the Talisman of 7 Hammers. Vulkan traveled from Nocturne with 3 of his salamanders that had found him at the steps of Mount Deathfire, opening a webway portal with the Talisman of 7 Hammers. The journey to Terra was fraught with dangers, facing many threats from Dark Eldar, Sons of Horus, Demons, and worse. Upon reaching Terra, Vulkan was greeted by the Praetorian of Terra, Rogel Dorn, whom Vulkan embraced in a display of brotherly affection. Entering the throne room, Vulkan conversed with the Emperor, now stuck to the throne, who informed Vulkan that the Talisman of 7 Hammers was in fact a key to the Dead Man's Switch in the Golden Throne, a final contingency should Horus take Terra. Vulkan was horrified at this prospect, but the Emperor assured him that this has always been his purpose, that the hesitation to use the weapons he crafted was his greatest virtue. Vulkan took his place at the Eternity Gate, alongside the Adeptus Custodes, though no records have been found of his role during the Siege of Terra. What information is known about the Primarch after this point is scarce and scattered, with only fragments existing to glean any knowledge from. It is said that Vulkan opposed the implementation of the Codex Astartes, not out of any strategic or personal reason, merely the fact that his legion had been reduced to such a small number that there were barely any legionaries left to split into chapters. After the Codex crises, Vulkan disappeared in a manner similar to Leman Russ, promising to return at the end time. This is contradicted by the fact that Vulkan would re-emerge during the War of the Beast, where Imperial forces tracked him down to the planet of Caldera and convinced him to join the war effort against the Beast. The Imperial fleet made its way to Olanor, where Primarch and Prime Ork would face off in a titanic battle for dominance. And so we come full circle. The Salamanders scour the galaxy to find the 7 artifacts that Vulkan hid during the Great Crusade, holding on to the hope that their Primarch will return to them once they have brought them back to Nocturne. The Salamanders hold this belief above all else, that Vulkan lives.